I was in my office at Fort Hood, Texas, the smell of desert dust and gun oil so familiar it was comforting. Discipline, order. It was the world I'd built for myself after 30 years of believing I was an orphan. Everything fell apart at 14:30 hours, a call from a law firm in Washington, D.C. Major Selena Hewitt, I'm Attorney Hayes, representing General Robert Morgan. I was about to hang up, assuming a wrong number. Your father. His voice was calm. The air evacuated my lungs. My father died 30 years ago. The silence on the other end was heavy. He's dying, Major, and he wants to see you. Just before I could respond, another voice, younger, angrier, cut in on the line. My father is delirious. Don't come. You have no part here. Is that clear? The click of the hang-up echoed like a gunshot. I didn't just have a father. I had an enemy. The dial tone hummed in the sudden, deafening silence of my office. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't sweep the perfectly aligned reports off my desk. I placed the receiver back in its cradle with a slow, deliberate precision that belied the Category 5 hurricane tearing through my insides. My knuckles were white where I gripped the edge of the steel government issue desk. I focused on my breathing. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. The tactical breathing that had kept me steady under enemy fire now felt utterly inadequate. You have no part here. The words weren't just an insult, they were a verdict. A judgment passed down from a life I never knew, by a man whose voice was slick with the entitlement of the Washington elite. For 30 years, my identity had been forged in the stark reality of state-run homes and the unforgiving crucible of the U.S. Army. I was Major Hewitt, a soldier who had earned her rank, her respect, her very existence, through nothing but grit and performance. I had no part in anything because I had built every part of myself, from scratch. That voice on the phone hadn't just threatened me, it had tried to erase me. A cold, familiar anger began to uncoil in my gut. It wasn't the hot, explosive rage that leads to mistakes. It was a glacial fury, the kind that sharpens the mind and steadies the hand. It was the anger that had pushed me to run faster, shoot straighter, and study harder than any of the cadets at West Point who had last names that opened doors. A memory surfaced, the voice of my first tactical officer, a grizzled colonel who seemed ancient to me then. Hewitt, he'd barked during a field exercise. In the fog of war, decisive action, even if it's wrong, is better than no action at all. This was the fog of war, and I was done being a ghost. My personal laptop was an old, rugged Panasonic Toughbook, built for the field. I flipped it open, the machine humming to life. This wasn't a personal matter anymore. It was an intelligence operation. The objective? Establish a profile on the opposing force. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my training taking over. I started with open source intelligence. A quick search on LexisNexis pulled up every public record on Michael Morgan, Georgetown Law, top of his class. Partner at a powerhouse DC lobbying firm by 35. Photographs showed him at charity galas with senators, smiling with the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no. He was the perfect son of a perfect dynasty. Then came the father, General Robert Morgan, United States Marine Corps. 4 stars, a living legend. His official biography read like a chapter of American military history. Silver Star, multiple Purple Hearts. Countless articles in the Washington Post and the New York Times lauded his strategic brilliance and unwavering integrity. He was a titan, a man who had shaped policy and commanded legions, and he was, apparently, my father. The pieces clicked into place, forming a bleak mosaic of power and influence. I wasn't up against a resentful brother I'd never met. I was up against the entire architecture of a legacy. Michael wasn't just protecting a dying man. He was protecting an institution, a carefully curated history that had no room for a bastard daughter from the Texas plains. He was guarding the family name, and I was the threat that had to be neutralized. The thought sent another surge of icy resolve through me. I stood up and walked to the small footlocker that served as my only real piece of furniture besides the desk and chair. It had followed me from every duty station since basic training. It held everything that defined me. My dog tags, My first marksmanship medal, a worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And at the very bottom, a small lacquered wooden box no bigger than my hand. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside, there was only a single, faded Polaroid. A young woman with my eyes smiling, holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. Me. On the back, in faded blue ink, was a looping script. For my SGM, stay safe, SGM. For my entire life, those initials had been a mystery, a breadcrumb from a past I couldn't reach. But now they burned with the intensity of a flare in the dark. Selena Grace Morgan. It wasn't a demand, it was proof. Proof that I existed, that I was acknowledged, even if it was just on the back of a 3x3-inch piece of paper locked in a box. It was all the justification I needed. I wasn't a claimant looking for a handout. I had a claim to the truth. That, at least, was my birthright. I closed the box, my decision made. The fog was clearing. I knew the mission. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the DC law firm from my caller ID. It was answered on the first ring. Hayes. The voice was the same, calm and professional. My own voice was steady, devoid of the emotion that had ripped through me minutes before. It was the voice of Major Hewitt, a field-grade officer issuing orders. Mr. Hayes, this is Major Hewitt. I didn't wait for him to reply. I will be on the earliest available flight to Washington. I'm not coming to contest a will or ask for a damn thing. I'm coming for 5 minutes of truth from General Morgan himself. I let that hang in the air for a second, a clear statement of intent. Then I delivered the final, non-negotiable term of my engagement. And Mr. Hayes, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steel-edged command. Ensure his son does not get in my way. I hung up before he could answer. It wasn't a request. It was my marching order. The battle for the truth had begun. And I would not fail. The Uber turned off the main road onto a private lane flanked by ancient oak trees. A quarter-mile later, it stopped before a set of imposing wrought iron gates that swung open without a sound. The Morgan estate. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement of generational power, a white-columned brick fortress sitting on a manicured Virginia lawn that rolled down towards the Potomac. As the car crunched to a halt on the gravel driveway, I saw him. He was waiting on the top step, exactly as I'd pictured, a sentinel guarding his ancestral home. I paid the driver and stepped out. The humid DC air a stark contrast to the dry Texas heat I'd left behind. Michael Morgan was taller than his photos suggested, dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my first car. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his polished Italian shoes reflected the overcast sky. He didn't move as I approached, just watched me, his arms crossed over his chest. It was a posture of absolute, unshakable ownership. As I reached the bottom step, his eyes did exactly what I knew they would. They flickered down to my practical leather boots, traveled up the clean line of my navy blazer and dark gray trousers, and finally settled on my face, my hair cut in its customary military short style. A faint, dismissive smirk touched his lips. It was the kind of appraisal that wasn't about attraction. It was about classification. He was slotting me into a category: outsider, unworthy, insignificant. A familiar voice echoed in my head, not my own, but Brené Brown's from a podcast I'd listened to on a long flight once. Don't ever bother with criticism from people who aren't in the arena. This man wasn't in my arena. He'd never even seen it. I told you not to come, he said, his voice a low hiss of controlled fury. I met his gaze without flinching, my own posture straight, shoulders back. The parade ground stance was so ingrained it was second nature. And I told Mr. Hayes you were not to get in my way, I replied, my voice even. Now, if you don't mind. I didn't wait for permission. I ascended the steps and walked directly toward him. For a split second, I saw indecision in his eyes, the shock of a man whose authority had never been so calmly disregarded. He expected me to be intimidated, to argue from the bottom step. He didn't expect me to simply advance. I brushed past him, my shoulder nearly grazing the expensive wool of his suit, a deliberate and unmistakable breach of his personal space. I heard his sharp intake of breath as I stepped over the threshold into his home. The foyer was vast, with a black and white marble floor and a sweeping central staircase. The air smelled of lemon polish and old money. He recovered quickly, his footsteps sharp and angry behind me as he followed me in. "What do you want? Money?" he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Is that the play here? We can arrange that. A small settlement to make you disappear and not trouble my father in his final days." He was trying to frame the narrative, to cast me as a cheap extortionist. It was a classic lawyer's tactic. If you can't win on the facts, you discredit the opponent. It was designed to strip me of any moral high ground, to reduce my existence to a transaction. I stopped in the center of the grand hall and turned to face him fully. "The only thing I want, Mr. Morgan, is 5 minutes with him." I let the words settle in the cavernous space. "And that's the one thing your money can't buy." His jaw tightened, a small muscle twitching in his cheek. He opened his mouth to retort, but as his eyes glanced past me, they widened almost imperceptibly. I followed his gaze. And then I saw it. Hanging in a place of honor on the main wall of the grand staircase was a portrait. It was a formal oil painting, massive and expertly done, set in a heavy, gilded frame. It was of me. I was in my army service uniform, the deep blue jacket immaculate, the brass buttons gleaming. The gold oak leaves of my rank were clearly visible on my shoulders. My expression was serious, professional, my eyes looking straight out from the canvas, straight at him. I froze, the air punched from my lungs for the second time in as many days. My mind raced, trying to process the impossibility. The photograph it was based on was my official promotion photo. It was in my military records. How did it get here, rendered in oil paint and hanging in the heart of this house like a sacred icon? I turned my head slowly to look at Michael. For the first time, the armor of his arrogance was gone. The confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a raw, naked insecurity. He looked at the painting, then at me, and for a fleeting moment, he looked like a lost little boy. "It's just one of the old man's whims," he stammered, his voice losing its sharp, authoritative edge. The dismissal was weak, unconvincing. He couldn't meet my eyes. I had seen his tell. The painting wasn't just a whim, it was a testament. It was a tangible, undeniable link between me and the general, a 30-year secret given a place of honor in his home. It was a validation that Michael, for all his money and status, clearly didn't possess. In that moment, I understood. He wasn't afraid of losing an inheritance. He was terrified that he had never truly been the sole heir to his father's respect. His enemy wasn't an interloper. It was a ghost in a uniform hanging on his wall. The tense silence was broken by the sound of footsteps approaching. Attorney Hayes appeared from a hallway, his expression neutral. He was a man in his 60s, with tired eyes that had seen too many family disputes. He nodded at me, a brief acknowledgement, before turning his gaze to a visibly flustered Michael. "The general is waiting," Mr. Hayes said simply. The fight went out of Michael's shoulders. He knew he was beaten. He had no authority here. He shot me a look of pure venom, his jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. "Fine," he spat at me. "You get 5 minutes. 5. But I'll be right outside this door. Don't try anything." He had lost this first battle, and we both knew it. He had tried to bar the gates, and I had walked right through them. Mr. Hayes gestured toward a large mahogany door at the end of the hall. He opened it for me, the quiet click of the latch sounding like a gavel falling. The room beyond was dark. I took a steadying breath and stepped inside, alone. The door closed softly behind me, shutting out the world and my brother. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, the sound final. For a moment, I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. The room was dark, with only a single lamp casting a weak, yellow circle of light in the corner. The air was thick with the sterile, chemical smell of antiseptic and sickness, layered over the faint, musty scent of old books and dust. It was the smell of a life drawing to a close. From my position by the door, I could feel the oppressive presence of Michael on the other side, a silent, hateful weight against the wood. A prison guard for a 5-minute sentence. The only sound in the room was the soft, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor and the quiet hiss of an oxygen concentrator. A 30-year silence between a father and a daughter had been replaced by the sterile hum of medical machinery. My training kicked in, an automatic defense mechanism. I did a quick, sweeping reconnaissance of the space. It was a master bedroom, but it had been converted into a hospital ward. A top-of-the-line Hill-Rom Care Assist ES bed dominated the center of the room. An IV stand stood beside it, a clear bag of saline dripping methodically into a tube. The room was a battlefield, and the man in the bed was losing the war against time. He was smaller than I ever could have imagined. The photographs, the newsreels, the portrait hanging on his staircase, they all depicted a titan, a man with a commander's presence. The figure propped up against the pillows was a shrunken effigy of that legend. His skin was pale and thin, a strategic map of purple veins stretched over a landscape of bone. A fallen giant. But his eyes, even from across the room, they were not the eyes of a defeated man. They were weary, yes, but they were still sharp. They were a general's eyes. And they were fixed on me, tracking my every move as I walked slowly toward the bed. I stopped a few feet away, my hands held loosely at my sides in a posture of parade rest. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with the weight of unspoken decades. What do you say to the ghost who created you? His hand, frail and spotted with age, moved on the blanket. It was a gesture that seemed to require immense effort. When he spoke, his voice was a dry, papery whisper, the sound of rustling leaves. Selena. He paused, taking a shallow breath. You have your mother's eyes. The words should have been a comfort. They should have been a bridge. Instead, they were a spark on a short fuse. To be recognized, to have that single feature connecting me to a woman I never knew acknowledged by the man who had denied me everything else. It didn't soothe the wound. It ripped it wide open. It proved he knew. He remembered. And he still did nothing. The iron control I'd maintained since that first phone call began to fracture. Why? The word came out colder and sharper than I intended. I kept my voice low, a blade meant for one target. Why did you abandon me? Why did you let me grow up in foster homes, in institutions, believing I had no one in this world? I had prepared myself for a denial. I had braced for silence. I had even considered that he might not know who I was. I was not prepared for the answer he gave. He drew another ragged breath, his gaze unwavering. Because you were safer without me, he rasped. The words were quiet, but they hit me with the force of a physical blow. Safer if you were a ghost. A ghost. The word hung in the air, nonsensical and cruel. All the anger I had suppressed, all the pain I had disciplined into silence, churned inside me. It was an explanation that explained nothing. It was an insult disguised as a reason. Safer? I took a step closer, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. Safer from what? From a family? From a name? From knowing who you are. You owe me more than a riddle. You owe me a clear and direct answer, General. I used his rank as a weapon, a reminder of the world of order and accountability he supposedly represented. But the effort of his last sentence had taken its toll. A wave of exhaustion washed over his features, the light in his sharp eyes flickering out. His eyelids fluttered, then closed. He was gone, retreated back into the fog of his illness. The door flew open instantly, as if Michael had been listening with his ear pressed against the wood. He strode in, his face a mask of smug triumph. Time's up, he announced, his voice ringing with satisfaction. He saw his father's closed eyes and my stunned, furious expression and drew his own conclusions. You got what you wanted. Now get out. His hand was on my back, not guiding, but shoving me toward the door. I was so blindsided by the general's cryptic words that I didn't even resist. He pushed me out into the brightly lit hallway as if I were a trespasser, an intruder who had sullied his sacred space. The door clicked shut again, a final, definitive period on a 30-year sentence. I stood there, reeling, the questions in my mind now screaming louder than ever. Just as I turned to leave the suffocating atmosphere of that house forever, Attorney Hayes stepped in front of me, blocking my path. He had a pained, almost apologetic look on his face. "Major Hewitt," he said quietly. Without another word, he held out a thick manila envelope. It was heavy, sealed not with glue, but with a dark red wax seal bearing a crest I didn't recognize. "The general instructed me to give this to you," Hayes said, his voice low and urgent. He leaned in slightly, his eyes flicking down the long hallway toward Michael, who was now watching us with narrowed, suspicious eyes. "For you," Hayes emphasized, "and you alone." His specific instructions were that you were to receive it only after you had spoken with him. I took the envelope from his hand. It felt less like a document and more like a weapon. Its weight was substantial, filled with the answers my father had refused to give. And from the way Michael was glaring at it from 50 feet away, his jaw clenched in a knot of fury, he knew it too. This envelope was the next battlefield. I clutched it to my side. A line from a Bible a kind foster family had given me years ago surfaced in my memory. A mantra for a lonely child looking for answers. "And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Looking at the sealed envelope in my hand, I wasn't so sure about the free part. But I knew one thing for certain. The truth was in here, and I was about to unearth it. I made it back to the soulless quiet of my hotel room, a generic Marriott near Reagan National Airport, on autopilot. The heavy manila envelope sat on the cheap laminate desk next to a styrofoam cup of now cold coffee. I didn't touch it. For what felt like hours, I just stared at it. My field jacket still on, my boots still laced. It lay there like an unexploded bomb, the red wax seal a silent, crimson warning. Everything I ever wanted to know was likely inside that envelope, and the thought terrified me more than any firefight I had ever been in. Finally, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. My hands, I noticed, were trembling slightly as I picked it up. There was no elegant way to do this. I broke the seal with my thumb and ripped the flap open, the sound of tearing paper unnaturally loud in the still room. I slid the thick stack of documents out. It was a file, neatly organized. The first page was a copy of a birth certificate from the Commonwealth of Virginia, dated 31 years ago. The paper was yellowed, the typewritten font slightly faded. And there it was, in stark black and white. Child's name, Selena Grace Morgan. Father, Robert A. Morgan, Captain, USMC. Mother, Laura E. Morgan. My breath caught in my throat. I traced my own name, my real name, with my fingertip. Beneath the certificate was a photograph, a 4:6 color print. A handsome man in a Marine Corps uniform, his arm around a beautiful woman with kind, smiling eyes. My eyes. She was holding a newborn baby, swaddled in a yellow blanket. Me. They both looked radiant, impossibly happy. It was a perfect family portrait of a life I never had. A life that had been stolen from me before I could even form a memory of it. My training forced me to keep going, to process the intelligence, to push emotion aside. I turned the page, and then another, and another. My blood ran cold. The file was a meticulously curated history of my stolen life. Report cards from elementary school in Norfolk. A certificate for winning the 8th grade science fair. A yellowed newspaper clipping from a local Virginia paper, the Virginian Pilot, with a small photo of me crossing the finish line at a high school track meet. Selena Hewitt sets new district record in the 800-meter. He hadn't just known I existed. He had been a ghost in the background of my entire life. A silent, ever-present warden. The feeling was a nauseating cocktail of violation and a strange, twisted sense of being protected. And then I saw the last document in this section, and my stomach dropped. It was a copy of my official Army promotion recommendation to the rank of Major. It detailed my service record, my commendations, my performance reviews. In the bottom right corner, in the box for final approval by the review board chairman, was a signature. A bold, authoritative scrawl I'd seen on dozens of official military histories. General Robert Morgan. He hadn't just been watching. He had been intervening, steering, shaping my career from the shadows. I wasn't just his daughter, I was his project. I put those papers aside, my hands shaking more violently now. The final section of the file was different. It was thicker, bound by a metal clip, and stamped across the top in faded red ink were the words, Top Secret, Declassified. The cover sheet read, Operation Amber Torch, After Action Report and Threat Assessment. I began to read, my mind shifting into the analytical mode of an intelligence officer. The language was cold, clinical, bureaucratic. It detailed a covert operation from 31 years ago, somewhere in the Middle East. It spoke of high-value targets, counterintelligence, and local assets. It mentioned my father, then a colonel, as the commanding officer. The mission was a success, but it had repercussions. The report detailed a credible and extreme threat from a radical splinter group, not against the U.S. government, but a personal vendetta against the officers who had led the operation. It was a kill list. My eyes scanned the lines, my heart hammering against my ribs. I saw her name before I was ready for it. Laura E. Morgan, wife of Call. Robert Morgan, civilian casualty. The official report of a single-vehicle automobile accident is a cover. Forensic evidence confirms targeted assassination. A wave of nausea washed over me. My mother. She hadn't died in an accident. She had been murdered. And then I read the next line, the one that changed everything. Primary secondary target identified, Selena G. Morgan, infant daughter. Threat assessment, imminent and unavoidable. I had to stand up. I paced the small room from the window overlooking the airport runway to the door and back again, the document clutched in my hand. He hadn't left her. She had been taken from him. And I was next. I forced myself to sit on the edge of the bed and read the final page. It was a recommendation memo written on official Department of Defense letterhead. My eyes scanned the words, but my brain refused to process their meaning. Proposal. To neutralize the ongoing threat against the sole remaining dependent, it is recommended that a staged termination event be executed for subject SGM. SGM, Selena Grace Morgan. A falsified death certificate will be entered into the official record. Subject will then be placed into the state foster care system under a new, untraceable identity. This action provides the highest probability of long-term survival for the subject. The world tilted on its axis. The clinical detached language was a smokescreen for an unthinkable horror. A staged termination event, a fake death certificate, a new identity. My father hadn't abandoned me. He buried me. To save my life, he had agreed to a plan that erased my existence. He had signed off on the death of his own daughter on paper, mourned a wife who was murdered, and then watched from an impossible distance as his only child grew up believing she was an orphan. The truth wasn't a simple, selfish act of abandonment. It was a monstrous, impossible choice, a sacrifice so profound it bordered on insanity. The pain of being left behind was nothing compared to this. This was the agony of being erased. I wasn't an abandoned child. I was a survivor of my own death. The papers slipped from my numb fingers, scattering across the cheap hotel carpet. The life I knew, the discipline, the order. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed stage for a play I never knew I was in. Discovering a secret that completely rewrites your past is a uniquely disorienting kind of pain. It feels like the floor has literally dropped out from beneath you. If you've ever felt that shock of a family truth coming to light, please support this story by hitting the like button. And if you feel comfortable, just comment, I understand below. So we know we're not alone in these moments. I sank to my knees amidst the wreckage of my identity, my real life and my stolen one spread out all around me. The anger I had felt toward him, the cold resolve, it all evaporated, replaced by a hollow, aching grief so vast it felt like it could swallow me whole. I didn't call ahead. I simply took another Uber back to the Arlington estate, the file of declassified documents sitting on the seat beside me like a silent passenger. The hollow grief that had consumed me in the hotel room had solidified into a new kind of purpose. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into this house hours earlier, bristling with anger and a demand for justice. The truth I had found was far more complex than justice. It demanded something else entirely. It demanded understanding. When the heavy front door opened, it was Michael again. His face, already etched with suspicion, darkened into a thunderous scowl when he saw me. He tried to block the doorway with his body. "What the hell are you doing back here?" he growled. "You had your 5 minutes." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time I felt a flicker of something other than contempt. I felt a sliver of pity. He was a man standing guard over a history he didn't even fully understand. "I need to see his study," I said. My voice was quiet, stripped of the military authority I'd used before. It was just a statement. "Absolutely not," he spat, his voice rising. "That is his private space. You have no right." "My mother was murdered," I cut him off, the words hanging in the air between us, cold and sharp. "I was terminated on paper to keep me alive. I think that buys me every right in this house." His face went pale. The words hit him like a physical shock, robbing him of his bluster. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, processing the raw data of a truth he had clearly never been privy to. Before he could form a response, Mr. Hayes appeared behind him, placing a gentle but firm hand on his shoulder. "She's right, Michael," the lawyer said, his voice weary but resolute. "This is her legacy, too. Let her pass." Michael stumbled back, defeated not by my anger, but by the sheer weight of a truth he couldn't fight. He looked from me to Hayes, his eyes wide with confusion and a dawning horror. He was no longer the gatekeeper. He was just another ghost in this house of secrets. Mr. Hayes led me down a quiet, wood-paneled hallway to a door I hadn't noticed before. He unlocked it and pushed it open, but he didn't follow me inside. "Take all the time you need, Major," he said softly, then pulled the door almost completely shut, leaving me in the silence. The general's study was not the office of a warrior. It was a shrine. The room was lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and the air smelled of old paper, leather, and pipe tobacco. But instead of framed medals and pictures with presidents, the walls were covered with maps. Not battlefield maps of foreign countries, but satellite topographical maps of Fort Hood, Texas, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, even a detailed map of a small, dusty corner of Afghanistan. Every place I had ever been stationed. Small red pins were stuck into specific locations. My barracks, my command posts. My eyes scanned the bookshelves. I saw the landmark Thucydides, On War by Clausewitz, the classics I expected. But sitting right beside them were dozens of books on the history of the U.S. Army, not the Marine Corps. There were biographies of Grant and Eisenhower. There was a well-worn copy of the Army Ranger Handbook. It was the library of a man trying to understand a world that wasn't his own. My world. Then I saw the glass-fronted cabinet in the corner. My legs felt weak, and I had to place a hand on the back of a leather armchair to steady myself. It wasn't filled with military honors. It was filled with my life. A pair of tiny, worn pink ballet slippers from a recital I barely remembered. The blue first-place ribbon from that 8th-grade science fair. The actual medal from the high school track meet, the one the local paper had written about, tarnished with age. He had been there. He had collected these pieces of my life, these artifacts of my childhood, like a secret, heartbroken curator. Mr. Hayes had given me a small, antique brass key. It fit the lock on the top drawer of the massive mahogany desk. With a soft click, the drawer slid open, and there they were. Dozens of bundles of letters, each tied neatly with a simple black ribbon, organized by year. My breath hitched. I lifted the first bundle. On top, a simple note card read, in that same bold script from my promotion papers, "To my Selena." I sank to the floor, my back against the desk, and untied the first ribbon. The paper was thick, creamy stationery, embossed with the 4-star insignia of a general. The first letter was dated on my 8th birthday. "My dearest Selena," it began, "today you are 8 years old. I watched you from a parked car across the street from your elementary school. You were playing on the swings during recess. Your hair has gotten so long, you looked lonely. That is my fault. That is a burden I will carry every day of my life. Happy birthday, my little soldier. I love you. Dad." A single tear escaped and splashed onto the page. I quickly wiped it away and reached for the next bundle, my hands trembling. This one was from 10 years later. You joined the army. I read your enlistment papers today. A part of me, the Marine in me, wanted you to wear the eagle, globe, and anchor. But the father in me knew the army was the right place for you. You have your mother's heart, a warrior's spirit with a core of kindness. I'm so proud it hurts, and I'm so terrified I can barely breathe. Stay safe. Please, stay safe. Dad. I opened letter after letter, a dialogue across 30 years of silence. He wrote on the day I graduated from West Point. He wrote on the day I was promoted to captain, a single, tear-blotted sentence. They made you a captain today. I cried. He wrote about his loneliness, about the crushing weight of his secret, about how he spoke to my portrait on his staircase every single night before he went to bed. Each letter was a confession. Each page was a silent scream of love and regret, a testament to a father's unending, helpless devotion. The last wall inside me, the final, fortified bastion of my anger, didn't just crack, it was obliterated. It crumbled into dust and washed away in a flood of tears I hadn't realized I'd been holding back for a lifetime. I wasn't just weeping for the lost childhood, for the birthdays without a father, for the graduations without a family. I was weeping for him. For the 30 years he had spent in this room, writing letters that would never be sent. For the man who had to watch his daughter grow up through newspaper clippings and classified reports. For the father who had to become a ghost to keep his child safe from other ghosts. Lying on the floor of my father's secret shrine to me, surrounded by the proof of his hidden love, I finally understood. He wasn't just the architect of my pain, he was a prisoner of it too. I walked out of the study and back down the long, silent hallway. The house felt different now, its secrets no longer hostile, just tragic. In my hand, I carried a single letter, the paper soft and worn at the creases. My own tears had dried, leaving behind not the emptiness I expected, but a profound, sorrowful stillness. The war inside me was over. All that was left was to find a way to sign the peace treaty. Michael was still standing guard outside his father's bedroom door, a sentry at a post that had already been overrun. His arms were crossed, his expression a familiar mask of bitter resentment. When he saw me approaching, he stiffened, preparing for another battle. He didn't get one. I met his hateful glare with an expression he couldn't read, because it was one I had never felt before. A quiet, aching pity. I walked toward him, and as he opened his mouth to speak, I simply moved past him, my gaze fixed on the door. He was an obstacle, a piece of furniture in the way of my true objective. His petty war for territory and recognition meant nothing to me now. I had seen the real battlefield, the lonely one inside his father's study, and it had changed everything. I heard him let out a frustrated sigh behind me, the sound of a man whose enemy had simply refused to fight. I pushed the door open gently and stepped back into the dimly lit room. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was slower now, the spaces between each beat longer, more fragile. He was awake. His eyes, though clouded with pain, found mine as I entered. And in them, I saw something that shattered the last of my defenses. It wasn't pride or authority or even regret. It was fear. He was afraid of me. I walked to the side of the bed, the single letter held loosely in my hand. He watched me, his breathing shallow. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words a monumental effort. My body tensed, bracing for an explanation, a justification for the plan that had erased me. But that's not what came. "Not for what I did," he rasped, his eyes pleading for me to understand. "But because I was too much of a coward to face you sooner." He held my gaze, and in that moment, the 4-star general was gone, replaced by a man confessing his deepest failure. After the threat was neutralized, years ago, I should have found you. But I was afraid. I would look at your picture, the woman you were becoming, and all I could think was that you would hate me. And I couldn't bear it. His voice broke on the last word. That silence, it started as a shield to protect you. But it became a prison to hide me. His confession was the key that unlocked the last chamber of my heart. He hadn't been a cold, calculating strategist. He had been a grieving husband and a terrified father who had then become a lonely old man trapped by his own fear and shame. He hadn't been judging me from afar all these years. He had been dreading my judgment upon him. I didn't say, "I forgive you." The words felt too small, too simple for the vast, complicated landscape of our history. Instead, I pulled the worn wooden chair closer to his bed and sat down. I unfolded the single piece of stationery in my hand. "I was 10 years old," I said, my voice soft. And then I began to read the words he had written 21 years ago. "Your foster mother called my liaison today," I read. "She said you had your first piano recital at school. You played Bach. She said you were nervous, but you were wonderful. I parked 3 blocks away and listened. I couldn't see you, but I could hear the music through the open windows of the auditorium. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. You have your mother's gift. She would have been so proud. I am so proud." My voice was thick with emotion as I finished, but it didn't break. I carefully folded the letter along its original creases and placed it on the bedside table. Then I looked at him, and for the very first time, I didn't see a ghost from my past, or a general, or a name on a declassified document. I saw my father. Slowly, I reached out and placed my hand over his. His skin was like paper, his bones as fragile as a bird's wing. He was so weak, yet his fingers instinctively curled, a faint pressure against my own. "I'm here, Dad," I whispered. The word, spoken aloud for the first time in my life, was an absolution. It was permission for him to let go. A wave of profound peace washed over his face, smoothing the lines of pain and fear. A faint, genuine smile touched his lips, the first I had ever seen. The weight of his 30-year vigil seemed to lift from his frail shoulders. I watched. He whispered, his eyes locking with mine, a final transmission from a soul preparing for its last journey. I watched every ceremony, every salute. I was there. Those were his last words. As he spoke them, his eyes never left mine, and I watched as the last flicker of light, the last ember of his long, tormented love, faded into stillness. The rhythmic beep of the monitor beside me faltered and then surrendered to a single, unbroken tone that filled the quiet room. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just sat there, holding my father's hand as it grew cool in mine, a soldier standing watch until the end of the mission. We had found our peace, together. After a few moments, the door opened softly. Mr. Hayes stepped in. He looked at the silent monitor, at my hand still covering the general's, and his face was a mask of gentle sorrow. He didn't offer condolences or platitudes. He simply walked to the foot of the bed where a wooden case rested. He opened it and took out a perfectly crisply folded American flag, the kind given to the families of fallen service members. He walked over and held it out to me. "He wanted you to have this," he said, his voice thick with unspoken emotion. He pressed the heavy, symbolic triangle of stars and stripes into my free hand. He said, "You earned it." The funeral of General Robert Morgan was an exercise in solemn military pageantry. Arlington National Cemetery was a sea of perfectly manicured green hills, dotted with endless rows of stark white headstones. The sky was a high, overcast gray, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oaks, as if the nation itself were sighing in mourning. High-ranking officers from every branch of the service were in attendance, their uniforms a somber rainbow of blues, whites, and greens. Senators and congressmen stood with practiced gravity, their faces arranged in masks of respectful sorrow. I was there, too. I stood apart from the main gathering, positioned under the shade of a large maple tree on a nearby hill. I wore my own Army service uniform, the dark blue jacket pressed, the brass shined to a mirror finish. From my vantage point, I was just another anonymous officer paying her respects to a fallen giant of the military. I was a secret hidden in plain sight. Down below, in the front row of seats reserved for family, sat Michael. He was the very picture of the grieving son, flanked by distant cousins and elderly aunts I had never seen before. They were a tableau of a family united in sorrow, a perfect curated image for the photographers discreetly snapping pictures for the society pages. I watched them, but I felt nothing. Not anger, not jealousy, just a profound, hollow emptiness. The peace I had made with my father was a private treaty, a classified document. To the rest of the world, I didn't exist, and even in his death, that secret was being kept. The Marine Corps Honor Guard performed their duties with flawless precision. The casket team carried the flag-draped coffin with crisp, synchronized movements. The crack of the 21-gun salute echoed across the hills, a sharp, percussive heartbeat of a nation's gratitude. The mournful, lonely notes of taps, played by a single bugler, hung in the air, a sound that never failed to pierce through my soldier's armor. Then Michael stood and walked to the podium to deliver the eulogy. He held a piece of paper, but he barely glanced at it. His voice, amplified by a small microphone, was steady and rich with emotion that sounded almost genuine. He spoke of honor, of duty, of a life dedicated to service. He told anecdotes of his father teaching him to fish, of the general's quiet strength and unwavering moral compass. It was a beautiful speech, perfectly crafted to bring a tear to the eye. And then he said the words that turned my emptiness into cold, hard steel. But above all else, Michael said, his voice thick with feigned sincerity, my father was a family man. He taught me that loyalty to one's family was the bedrock of all other virtues. He was a devoted husband and the greatest father a son could ever ask for. Every word was a lie, a perfectly polished, publicly delivered lie. He wasn't just eulogizing his father, he was erasing me from history all over again, right here, over our father's grave. He was cementing his own narrative, the clean, pristine version of the Morgan legacy, free from the inconvenient truth of me. The anger that rose in me wasn't the hot, messy rage of before. It was a cold, quiet fury. My enemy wasn't a jealous, insecure brother. He was a fraud, a man so dedicated to his own perfect image that he would desecrate the complex, painful truth of his father's life to protect it. After the service, as the honor guard meticulously folded the flag that had covered the casket, the crowd began to disperse. They offered their condolences to Michael, shaking his hand, patting his shoulder. He accepted their sympathy with a somber, dignified grace that was utterly nauseating. I remained in my spot under the tree, waiting. I knew he would come to me. He wouldn't be able to resist a final confrontation. Sure enough, after the last of the mourners had departed, his footsteps crunched on the grass behind me. I hope you're satisfied, he said, his voice low and dripping with venom. The mask of the grieving son had vanished, replaced by the pure, unadulterated hatred I'd seen in the foyer. You ruined his last days, you agitated him, brought up things that should have stayed buried. I turned to face him, my expression unreadable. I didn't feel anger anymore, I felt pity. Pity for this small, hollow man who had stood at the center of everything and had understood nothing. You weren't there, Michael, I said, my voice quiet, matter of fact. You have no idea what happened in that room. You don't know anything. I looked past him, to the fresh plot of earth where our father now lay. Your father didn't die in agitation. He didn't die in turmoil, I said, turning my gaze back to meet his. He died in peace. A peace you'll likely never understand. I saw the confusion, the flicker of doubt, the flash of anger in his eyes as he tried to process my words. I didn't give him the chance to respond. I held his gaze for one final moment, then executed a crisp about-face and began to walk away, leaving him standing alone in the silent cemetery with the ghost of a truth he could never possess. My stride was even, my back straight. I had almost reached the main gate when I heard my name called. It was Mr. Hayes, hurrying to catch up with me. Major, he said, slightly out of breath. One last thing. He held out his hand. Resting in his palm was a small black flash drive. The general recorded this for you about a week ago, he explained, pressing it into my hand. He was very specific. He wanted you to be the last one to hear it. I looked down at the small piece of plastic and metal. It was the final piece of the puzzle. Not a message from the past, but a directive for the future. My journey to Washington was over, but my father's story, and my part in it, was not. It was just beginning. That night, back in the sterile anonymity of my hotel room, The black flash drive felt heavier than a grenade in my hand. It was the last piece of intelligence, the final sealed order from a commander who was already gone. I sat on the edge of the stiff hotel bed, took a deep breath, and plugged the drive into my laptop. A single video file appeared on the screen. I clicked it. The image flickered to life, and there he was. My father. He was sitting in the armchair in his study, the one I had leaned on just days before. He was frail, the collar of his button-down shirt loose around his thin neck, but his eyes were clear and fiercely determined. This wasn't the dying man from the hospital bed. This was the general, reporting for his final duty. The video was shot from a static camera on his desk, giving it the intimate, stark feel of a confession. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He looked directly into the camera, as if he could see me sitting there. "Selena," he began, his voice raspy but firm. "If you are watching this, then I am gone. And it means the last 30 years of silence are finally over." He paused, gathering his strength. "I made a vow of silence to protect you. A tactical decision in a war you never knew you were fighting. But over the years, that vow became a burden heavier than any enemy I ever faced on the battlefield. I've learned, too late, that true honor isn't about hiding your mistakes. It's about owning them." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. A great general, George Patton, once said that the measure of success is not the position one has reached in life, but the obstacles one has overcome. By that measure, Selena, you are the most successful person I have ever known. But the greatest obstacle in your life was me. The words were direct, unflinching. He wasn't making excuses. He was taking responsibility. "I was wrong, Selena," he said. And for the first time, his voice cracked, the sound of a dam breaking after a lifetime of pressure. "I stole your family. I stole your name. I can never give you back the years we lost, the life you should have had with your mother and me. I can't fix that." He took a moment, his eyes glistening. "But I can give you something else." He went on to explain. Years ago, using his pension and savings, he had quietly established a private charitable foundation, a scholarship fund. He'd worked with Mr. Hayes to set up the legal framework, to fund it, to create its mission. But he had never activated it. It had remained dormant, a secret plan waiting for its activation code. He was too afraid that any public activity associated with his name would somehow create a trail that could lead back to me, putting me in danger all over again. "It's called the Morgan Scholarship for Military Orphans," he said, a flicker of the old pride in his voice. "It's for children like you, children of service members who have been left behind, who have to navigate the world alone. I wanted to give them the support, the chance, that I couldn't give you." He looked down at his hands, then back up at the camera, his eyes locking with mine one last time. "My real legacy isn't the stars on my shoulders or the citations in a frame," he concluded, his voice growing quiet, imbued with a profound finality. "It's what we do with the broken pieces, how we turn the battles we've lost into victories for someone else. I want you to take over this foundation, Selena. I want you to lead it. Turn our pain into hope for other kids who started out just like you, built something better from the wreckage I made." He leaned back in his chair, a look of exhaustion and release on his face. "That's how you truly come home." The video ended. The screen went black. I sat there in the silent hotel room, the glow of the laptop casting long shadows on the wall. The silence was different this time. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of understanding, of grief, of a strange and powerful sense of purpose. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of sorrow or anger. They were tears of release. This wasn't forgiveness being asked for or granted. This was a mission being passed on, a legacy being entrusted. He had given me the one thing I never knew I needed. Not an apology for the past, but a purpose for the future. I didn't sleep that night. I sat and watched the planes take off and land at the airport, their lights blinking in the dark. By the time the first gray light of dawn broke over the Washington Monument in the distance, my mind was clear. The fog of war was gone for good. I picked up my phone, but I didn't call the airline to book a flight back to Texas. I scrolled through my recent calls and found the number for Mr. Hayes. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the early hour. Hayes. Mr. Hayes, it's Selena. My voice was different. It wasn't the cold, hard voice of Major Hewitt. It wasn't the choked, emotional voice of a grieving daughter. It was something new. It was a voice of command, yes, but it was tempered with a quiet authority that came from a place of deep certainty. I need all the documentation for the scholarship fund sent to my email immediately, I said. And I need you to arrange a meeting with the Board of Trustees as soon as possible. I'll be taking over as president. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the old lawyer's smile. Of course, Major. And under what name shall I make the arrangements? I didn't hesitate. Morgan, I said. Selena G. Morgan. It was the first time I'd ever spoken the name aloud. It felt like coming home. The vow of silence had finally been broken, and my new life had just begun. The first set of documents Mr. Hayes emailed me weren't financial statements or legal charters. They were architectural blueprints and contribution records for a property in Norfolk, Virginia. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the address. I knew it instantly. It was the address of the St. Jude's Home for Children, the institution where I'd spent the most formative years of my childhood. Instead of flying back to Texas, I rented a car and drove south from D.C., down the long, flat stretch of I-95. The journey was a quiet, reflective pilgrimage back to the starting point of my life. But when I arrived, the place I remembered was gone. The old, grim brick building with its perpetually peeling paint and chain-link fence had been replaced. In its place stood a modern, welcoming two-story complex with large windows, a brightly colored playground, and a freshly painted sign near the entrance. The sign didn't say St. Jude's. It read, The Morgan Family Center. I parked the car and just sat there for a long time, staring. According to the records, for the past 15 years, an anonymous trust had been pouring millions of dollars into this place, renovating the buildings, expanding the programs, increasing the staff's salaries. An anonymous trust funded entirely by the pension of a single 4-star Marine Corps general. He had never left me. He had been here all along, silently taking care of the place that had taken care of me. I got out of the car and walked through the open gates. The sound of children laughing replaced the oppressive silence of the Arlington estate. On the playground, a young girl was sitting by herself on a swing, her small legs kicking listlessly at the wood chips below. She had pigtails and a serious expression, and she reminded me so much of myself at that age that it made my chest ache. I walked over and sat on the empty swing next to her. For a minute, we just sat in a comfortable silence, swaying gently back and forth. Are you waiting for someone? I asked finally. She shook her head, her pigtails flying. My dad's on a ship, she said, her voice small. He's in the Navy. He's been gone a long time. Norfolk, a Navy town. Of course. I bet you miss him a lot, I said. She nodded, looking down at her sneakers. Are you a soldier? She asked, her eyes catching the faint outline of my dog tags beneath my shirt. I tucked the chain back in. I am, I said. Is it hard? I thought about my life, the discipline, the deployments, the loneliness. And then I thought about this little girl, waiting for a father to come home from across the ocean. I thought about my own father, writing letters into a 30-year void. We were all soldiers in our own way. Yes, it's hard, I said, looking her right in the eye. But that's okay, because it makes us the strong ones. A small smile touched her lips, a flicker of understanding and pride. She started to swing higher, a new energy in her movements. I sat there with her for a little while longer, not as Major Hewitt, not as an orphan, not even as a daughter. I was just someone who understood. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That evening, I stood on the beach at Ocean View, watching the waves of the Chesapeake Bay roll in and kiss the shore. The setting sun painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple. I had come to Washington seeking truth, seeking justice, seeking a confrontation. But what I'd found was something else entirely. I had found a purpose. The anger, the grief, the years of feeling like a ghost. It all felt distant now, washed away by the gentle tide. Forgiveness wasn't a word I needed to say to him. It was an action I needed to take for him. It was continuing the mission he had started in secret. I looked out at the vast expanse of water, toward the horizon where the warships disappeared on their long journeys. I get it now, Dad, I whispered to the salty wind. I'm home. 2 days later, I sat at the head of a long polished table in a conference room in downtown Norfolk. I was dressed in a simple, professional black suit. Seated around the table were the 3 trustees of the Morgan Scholarship Fund, a retired admiral, a compassionate-looking female banker, and Mr. Hayes himself. The ghosts of Michael and his petty accusations felt a million miles away. They had no power here. This was my arena now. I didn't waste time with lengthy introductions. I laid out my vision with the clarity and precision of a mission briefing. The Morgan Family Center is an incredible achievement, I began, my voice steady and confident. But it is a defensive position. It's time for us to go on the offensive. I'm proposing an expansion. Phase 1 will be the creation of a mentorship program. We will partner with the local military commands, Navy, Army, Air Force, to pair active duty and retired service members with every child in this program. These kids don't just need a place to live, they need role models who understand the unique pressures of a military life. I continued, outlining plans for educational grants, for career counseling, for a network of support that would follow these children long after they left the center. I worked with the focus and unrelenting drive of a soldier on the most important mission of her life, because it was. As I spoke, I could see the initial skepticism on the faces of the trustees melt away, replaced by a growing sense of excitement and inspiration. They weren't just listening to a plan, they were listening to a daughter finally taking command of her father's true legacy. 1 year later, I stood on a podium in the newly built auditorium of the Morgan Family Center in Norfolk. The room was packed, filled with the hopeful energy of military families, the restless excitement of children, and the quiet dignity of fellow service members. I was in my Army uniform, the same one I had worn as a silent observer at my father's funeral. But today I wore it differently. It no longer felt like armor. It felt like a part of who I was. A soldier, a leader, and now, a healer. I looked out at the sea of faces, the first class of the Morgan Scholarship recipients and their families, and I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. When I stepped up to the microphone, a comfortable silence fell over the room. There was no prepared speech on the lectern in front of me, only a few notes I had jotted down on an index card. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the speakers but still feeling intimate. A little over a year ago, my life changed forever. I learned that the story I had told myself about who I was, about where I came from, was not the whole story. I discovered I had a father, a decorated general, a man who, for reasons I couldn't understand, had been a ghost in my life. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. My first instinct was anger. I felt betrayed. I felt erased. I came to Washington, D.C. armed for a fight, ready to demand answers for a lifetime of silence. And I found them. But the answers were not what I expected. I told them my story. Not all the classified details, but the heart of it. I spoke of my mother's murder, of the impossible choice my father had faced. I spoke of his profound, secret love and his profound, human mistake. I told the story not with bitterness, but with a deep and abiding compassion that had taken me a year to fully understand. My father, General Robert Morgan, taught me many lessons from afar, I said, my gaze sweeping across the young faces in the front row. He taught me the value of discipline, of service, of earning your place in the world. But the final and most important military lesson he ever taught me was this. The greatest courage is not found in winning a war on the battlefield. It's found in the quiet, terrifying moment you admit you were wrong. And the greatest honor is dedicating the rest of your life to making it right. This foundation, this center, these scholarships, this was his attempt to make it right. It is the legacy not of a general, but of a father. A legacy of turning pain into purpose. I looked out at them, my heart full. and it is my profound honor to carry that mission forward. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Later, during a small reception in the main hall, people came up to share their stories. A young Marine whose son had just received a scholarship. A Gold Star wife thanking me for creating the mentorship program. In the middle of it all, a young man in a crisp Navy JROTC uniform approached me, his expression serious and respectful. "Major Morgan," he asked, his voice earnest. "That was an incredible story. But I have a question, if that's okay." "Of course," I smiled. Did you ever really forgive him?" The question was honest, direct, and deserved an equally honest answer. I thought for a moment, not about the pain or the anger, but about the peace I felt standing in that room. "I did," I answered softly. "It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But I realized something crucial along the way. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I was giving him. It was a gift I was giving myself." I looked at the young cadet, hoping he would truly hear me. "It was the key that unlocked me from the prison of the past. It's what allowed me to be free." He nodded slowly, a look of profound understanding on his young face. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, and saluted. The next day, my journey came full circle. I drove back up to Arlington, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. I walked the familiar green hills, the silence here no longer feeling empty, but peaceful. I found his headstone, a simple white marker identical to all the others, bearing his name, his rank, and the dates of his life. Michael wasn't there. I hadn't seen or heard from him in a year. His war was his own to fight. I was no longer the outsider standing under a distant tree. I stood directly before the grave, a daughter visiting her father. I knelt down and placed a single, perfect white rose at the base of the cool stone. I thought of the man in the study, the man on the video, the father in the letters. I thought of the little girl on the swing and the young cadet with the honest question. I stood up, my duty done, my heart at peace. I whispered to the quiet air, the words meant only for him and for me. "We did it, General." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree nearby. "Semper Fi," I said, a final salute to the Marine I'd never known but had come to understand. "We're both home now." I turned and walked away, my step steady and sure on the sacred ground. I walked toward the gate, toward the future. A future no longer defined by a vow of silence, but one illuminated by a legacy of hope. My story on paper is now complete, but the journey of healing is one that I know we all share in our own ways. We all have our own silent histories to uncover, our own truths to face, and our own legacies to build from the broken pieces of the past. Thank you for walking this difficult path with me, from that first shocking phone call to this final, quiet peace. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of turning pain into purpose, please consider liking this story and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps more stories of strength and forgiveness find the people who need to hear them most. Until next time, stay strong.